Welcome back in, everybody. Final segment of the program. We appreciate you hanging out with us today. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. He's Derek Gunn. I am Rob Ellis. We are joined right now by Derek Bodner. Derek does an amazing job as a Sixers reporter for daily6.com, the Daily Six newsletter. And Derek, man, so much to dive into since the last time we spoke. Thanks for taking a couple minutes to hop on. Derek's shaking his head already. What do you?
I don't think I did anything.
What
was unintentional if I did?
No, not you, Derek. The other Derek.
Okay.
The bad Derek. Derek Gunn. What did you?
No, I'm shaking your head because of what you said. There's so much to talk about with the Sixers, and you're right. It's like, whew, makes your head spin.
No.
Don't be trying to.
All right.
embellish.
I thought you were. I mean, my God, I didn't even introduce Derek, and you were already doing it.
Derek, you have to understand. Rob's a little testy today because his Phillies are falling off the map.
Derek can appreciate that with the way the Phillies are.
No, I'm right there with you. Right there with you.
Totally frustrating. All right, Derek. So a lot to get into with Nick Nurse. I want to start with this one. In your opinion, is there any way to read into Nurse's hiring in terms of Harden coming back or not coming back? Are the two mutually exclusive in your estimation?
I certainly wouldn't say they're mutually exclusive. It does seem like, if you wanted to tailor the organization or, bend towards James, Mike D'Antoni would have been I guess the way I'd say it, it's not so much that Nick Nurse is pro or against Harden. It's that Nick Nurse isn't Mike D'Antoni. And if you were going to run the ship to cater towards James Harden, Mike D'Antoni would have been a logical choice. So I think you can read into it a little bit there. I also think it's interesting because Nick Nurse will get on you if you don't play defense. He'll get on you if you don't give that effort, that attention to detail. James has never really been known to do that. It'll be interesting how those two fit if they do end up being a pairing. But outside of the fact, I certainly wouldn't say they're mutually exclusive, but it is interesting just because it's not Harden's guy.
Right.
Do you think if Milwaukee, because we heard that Milwaukee was high on Nurse's radar, if Milwaukee hadn't assigned Adrian Griffin, do you think he would end up in Milwaukee more so than Philadelphia?
Yeah, well, the order is interesting there because it was reported that he withdrew his name before that hiring became official. Yeah. I don't know if he withdrew his name because he knew it was going to Griffin or if the fact that he withdrew the name is why they went with Griffin. I'm not 100% sure on that detail. But it would be interesting if he chose Philadelphia over Milwaukee because I think it's, there's pros and cons to both. The Sixers obviously aren't in the strongest cap situation, but Milwaukee's got some aging players being paid big money, and they're going to have some struggles under this new collective bargaining agreement as well. Giannis is a younger, more dependable superstar in that regard. It would have been interesting if he had his choice. I don't know whether or not he did have his choice, but I think there was some draw here, obviously, to come to Philadelphia. Coach Joel Embiid, he has a relationship having coached the Rio Grande Valley G League team. So he has a relationship, or I think back then it was still called the D League. It doesn't matter. He has a relationship with Daryl Morey. So I think that was a draw. But yeah, it was strange in the fact that there were so many high profile coaches out there, but it's also strange in that there were a lot of really good win now situations for coaches that you don't normally fire a coach in. Like these jobs, like Milwaukee, like Phoenix, like Philadelphia, don't normally become available. It's a weird offseason.
Derek, you've had we all have a little time to digest how the Sixers season came to a conclusion. And I'm going to tie this into Nurse in a second, but can you wrap your head around how that Game 7 went down, the way that Embiid and Harden kind of went out like that?
No, it was look, we've seen in this series, the Eastern Conference Finals, after the Sixers got eliminated, playoffs are a roller coaster, and it's becoming more and more a roller coaster. The more and more teams become reliant on 3-point shooting. Part of the reason Miami came out and was, won so easily there in Game 7, they shot 50% from three. Nice. Sixers shot like 20%, 25%, something from three over the last two games. A couple of those go in, it certainly changes it. But what I always go back to is, the first 5 minutes of the game, Joel Embiid's head just wasn't there. And I'm not even talking offensively because I think as a game wore on, he started pressing, maybe reverting back to like how he played in 2018, his mind wasn't there defensively. And I have no idea how that happened. I certainly don't think it's from a lack of caring or anything like that. It's just, he seemed like he got swallowed up in the moment in a way that you need your star player to not happen. And I think that more than anything, that set the tone. And then when they met that adversity there in the third quarter, we all saw it. It wasn't great.
No.
Derek, we hear that Nurse is a no-nonsense type coach, not afraid to get in people's faces when he has to try to get the most out of them. And one question I brought up this week, I'm interested in hearing your perspective on is this. Joel Embiid has been treated with such kid gloves under Brett Brown and Doc Rivers. How will he respond if Nurse calls him out in a practice or calls him out during a timeout? Will he rise to the challenge? Will he pout and basically shut his game down? I think that's going to be a key element to watch in this relationship between the two.
Now, you say he was treated with kid gloves, but there was a GM's wife who tweeted that she wanted to get a ladder so she could slap him. So there was a little bit of confrontation there.
Barbara
Yeah,
Bottini, for those of you scoring at home.
That was
And
the
I'm
wife,
using
though.
GM's wife in quotations.
Yeah, that was the wife,
my God. Oh, my God. Yeah, well, we know it may have been somebody else very close to Barbara. Yes, anyway.
Now, I think it's a fair question just because when a superstar has been, had the franchise centered around him for so long.
Yeah.
And also Nick Nurse, he's a little confrontational, but he's also a little passive aggressive with the media too. Like there have been complaints that players will hear frustrations in the media before they hear it behind closed doors. I think that's something that can come back to bite him too. I think he's got to, be a little more delicate in this situation. He hasn't had, outside of that 1 year with Kawhi, he hasn't had a, top 5 player in the league kind of superstar. And this is a little different. But I think Joe needs to grow. And I think Joe can be pushed. I don't think that's the problem. You know what? I'm interested to see, because I think if you're going to get these guys into the best version of themselves, a version that can win a championship, let's disrupt things a little bit. Not completely, not go, you don't have to go Bill Belichick, but just a little bit. Get them a tiny bit outside of their comfort zone. I have a lot more confidence in Joel Embiid reacting well to that than I do James Harden, but I think it'll be interesting to see how both of them react to it. And I think it's maybe an experiment that you have to kind of try. I think one of the things I was a little leery on Mike D'Antoni, and I actually like Mike D'Antoni probably more than most people. I think he is a legitimate offensive genius. And when I look at this team, for all we'll talk about defense and the regular season, they're struggling at times. Postseason, when Joel Embiid's dialed in, he's one of the most impactful defenders in the world, and the Sixers generally acquit themselves well defensively. Offensively is where they struggle. I think you needed creativity on offense. That's one of the reasons why D'Antoni was interesting. But one of the concerns with D'Antoni is he would, cater to your stars. And by that, I don't mean like offensive play sets. I mean, he will give them rope that maybe won't get them outside of their comfort zone. So it could go up in flames. It could be one of these things where like for 2 years, it's great. And then it kind of wears on you after time. And that might be a trade-off you live with, because in 2 years, you could be challenging for a championship. Or it could be a disaster. I truthfully don't know. I lean towards good more than disaster, but I think all outcomes are in play.
So for the folks who maybe don't follow the intricacies of this, Derek, what does Nurse bring to the table in terms of coaching, whether it's strategic approach? We know he will hold players accountable, yes, but beyond that, whether it's schematics, X's and O's, and that kind of thing, what's he bring to the table?
Well, it's sort of weird because when he got to when he got to Toronto, he was in Toronto for 5 years as assistant before taking over. He was really brought in to revamp their offense and to modernize their offense. And they went, I think, up to the year before Kawhi, the year before Nick Nurse took over, they were the second ranked offense in the league. And they went from shooting like bottom 5 in 3-point attempts to top 5. It was a complete shuffle of their offensive philosophy. And then he took over this team with Toronto that has just a bunch of 6'7" athletes. And they were very active defensively. Their entire scheme was based around forcing turnovers, getting more possessions than you, getting out on the break to overcome their half-court deficiencies. And they would trap on the perimeter a lot. They would recover on the perimeter a lot. They try to get their defenders to take gambles on the perimeter. And then he would mix in things, very famously the box and one in the finals, to disrupt other team superstars. He used to throw a lot of attention at Joel Embiid. Back in Harden's heyday, he used to have, really aggressive schemes to get the ball out of Harden's hands. He will be aggressive in denying stars the opportunities to get comfortable. I think what's interesting is that I don't really think any of that really works with the Sixers personnel. That requires athletes, that requires good decision-making on defense. And the Sixers are filled with a bunch of either mediocre or inattentive defenders who make questionable decisions, but are anchored by Joel Embiid. They're a little more of a traditional defensive squad where you might get beat on the perimeter, but you have the big guy in the paint to clean everything up. So it'll be interesting to see how he adapts his ultra aggressive scheme, the forced turnovers, into one that's maybe more just funneling them into the big guy. Because if you ask George Niang to try to, cover ground, or if you ask Tobias Harris to make 5 right decisions over the course of a defensive possession, you're going to give up a lot of open shots. So I think he's got to be adaptable. I think he will. I think he's smart enough. I think he was working, his scheme in Toronto was based on the personnel that he had, but it will be interesting to see how he adapts that to this squad.
Was Nurse the right man for the job when you consider the teams being held hostage by the cap restraint? You know, the mind games, James Harden, the Jedi mind tricks James Harden is playing right now. Is he going? Is he staying? Does he want the max? Is it a ploy? So on and so forth. You can't do much really to improve the roster. Is Nurse the right guy to move to the next level with this team?
Yeah, I certainly, if you had asked me this question 12 months ago,
Yeah.
I would have said, like, I think Nick Nurse is one of the, maybe not one of the 5, but possibly somewhere in like the 3 through 7 type top coaches in the league. This year in Toronto was not good. Their offense was bad. It seemed like the team had stopped buying in. So that sort of dampens your enthusiasm a little bit. And like I said, I think if you're going to say the Sixers need creativity, and I think Nick Nurse was incredibly creative defensively with Toronto. But if you're going to tell me which side of the court you need creativity on, I would have said offensively. I think you need some way to get Joel Embiid unstuck in the second round of playoffs, or to get James Harden to where you can take what he gives you and propel an offense. And I think Nick Nurse can do that, but I'm not as confident as I am in his defensive scheme and chops. So, look, I might have gone with Mike D'Antoni in part because I think it might have been just a blast to cover, and I'm not going to deny that might be
why is that? Why? I'm curious why you say that.
Well, I think he plays a entertaining style of ball.
Okay.
I think he is liable to do just about anything, and I think he's liable to say just about anything. And as a journalist, that's pretty much all you can ask for. But I also do think that his creativity offensively could have helped Joel Embiid and James Harden, and almost especially Tyrese Maxey. I thought if there was one coach who could find a way to really get Tyrese Maxey to take that next step, not that there's only one coach, but I thought Mike D'Antoni had maybe the best chance of doing that. That being said, I think, Nick Nurse might be the better all-around coach. I think he might be the kind of guy to really give you what you need on both sides of the court. I do have questions over whether or not his personality and style might wear on people. And by people, I mostly mean Joel Embiid, but also a little bit of James Harden for the long term. And, what I saw in Toronto this past year wasn't great. But I think when I ranked him, he was certainly in my top 2, and I went back on my top 1 pretty consistently.
Okay.
Derek, what's your gut telling you with Harden? You sense that this is only a matter of time before he's back, or is the Houston stuff real? What do you think?
I think this is pretty easy. I think whichever team offers him the most money, he's probably going to. And I think if he had his preference, and this is sort of just my gut read, I think if he had his preference, he would prefer to have his money and be in Philadelphia where he can contend. But if he has to use, I don't think Houston is just a leverage play.
Okay.
Like, if Houston came out and offered, let's say, $30 million more over the course of a 4-year contract, I think he would go to Houston and probably be happy with that. I think, like I said, all things equal, I think he has interest in returning to Philly. But I would say Houston is more than a leverage play, but maybe not. My gut still says that he's back in Philly if the Sixers match that.
Okay.
Hey, Derek, Brett Siegel, an NBA insider also, I don't know if you know him or not. He just put out there an hour ago that Fred VanVleet has emerged as an offseason target for the 76ers with James Harden's future here up in the air. You think of VanVleet? Could the Sixers get a VanVleet in here?
I mean, I don't entirely know how that would, what is Fred VanVleet? He's owed he has a player option, so he's a free agent.
Yeah.
They're not going to have enough money to sign him.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I mean, maybe a sign-in trade, but, quite frankly, Fred VanVleet looked pretty bad. I think part of the reason that Toronto struggled this past year was that he just didn't look at himself. And the numbers were still good, but his shooting was down. His 3-point shooting was down. Defensively, he didn't look like the player he was. He looked like he struggled this year. So I'd be a little weary of that anyway, but I also just don't know how, outside of a sign and trade, how that would materialize. It sounds like the kind of thing where you just kind of make that connection because, the Toronto connection.
Sure.
But I haven't heard anything like that, and I'm not sure how solid that is.
Do you think they'll be able to move Harris? He's got 1 year. I think it's 39-ish, give or take. Is he attractive enough because it's the last year of his deal, Derek, to move him, or do people make too much of that part?
Just 39, just a small price.
That's all. I mean, no big deal. Pocket change. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Chump change.
No, I certainly think they will have opportunities to move him. Whether or not one comes across their table that makes sense is, we'll see.
Yep.
But I do think this new collective bargaining agreement, there are some pretty serious restrictions. It's being called a double apron, basically a third threshold, fourth, luxury, salary cap, luxury tax, apron, double apron. But once you basically cross a certain threshold in salary, it becomes very restrictive on the kind of moves that you can make, more restrictive than it ever has been in the history of the NBA. So I think some of these teams that are approaching that threshold are going to look to shed, long-term salary. The problem is the Sixers, especially if they re-sign Harden, are going to be approaching that second apron to the point where you can't make very many moves. So the Sixers basically motivations are going to be the same as teams that are looking to acquire Tobias Harris. So that's why I'm not sure a deal is going to come across the table that's going to make sense. But I do certainly think his trade value is higher now than that contract was a killer before. Now it's an asset. Right. It's just whether or not, like I said, I think the team that would be looking to acquire Tobias Harris would have the same motivation that the Sixers will have. And I'm not sure they're going to want to take on long-term salary.
So how do you improve this team then? How can you go about it, man? It's like
there's a reason Daryl Morey's making $15 million a year and I'm not. It's a very tough question.
But no, you know what? In all seriousness, Derek, this needs to be a monster offseason for him.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, he's got to get creative. He's got to find diamonds in the rough. Like, he's got to really.
This ain't Pat Riley we're talking about here.
I know, but live up to the reputation. He is, no.
No, you're 100% right. And this is where, Daryl Morey has been good in the past, finding ways to find contributors when you think he doesn't have any real assets to do so. It's going to be tough. Like, I think Tobias is there's a realistic chance you could see them trade that. Let's say you take his $40 million, you trade him for one player making $20 million, has a couple of years left, and one player that even out the salary. You could see something like that. You could even get crazy and add a Tyrese Maxey to Tobias Harris and go like borderline star hunting. Wow. You could do something crazy like that. I think that package would have a lot of value. You could see a James Harden sign and trade. You could see there's a lot of not a lot of options. There are options, but it's going to be tough. They're pretty far boxed in. They have very few draft picks to trade. I think the first one is like 2029, something like that they could trade. It's not right around the corner, so it doesn't have a lot of value. They don't really have very much salary cap flexibility. They're going to be, saddled by that second apron in pretty soon. They don't have very many tradable players. They've got a lot of players. You've got 4 rotation players who are free agents that you have to try to bring back. They're, you ask me, how do you take that next step? It might be Tyrese Maxey. That might be Tyrese Maxey taking a next step as a player and becoming a true lead guard type. That could be Tyrese Maxey as a trade chip, which nobody wants to hear. But I think Daryl Morey has to have his ears or his mind open to everything.
Wow. That's really interesting. Derek, I did want to sneak in a little NBA Finals talk with you, and we saw what the Heat did and that wacky series, man, that was crazy. Jimmy Butler, is it revisionist history from a lot of folks who are like, see, I told you so, like they should have kept him? Or was it a little bit different for the short period of time that he was here than maybe people are making it out to be?
Well, I think there were a lot of people that wanted him brought back. I wouldn't say that's revisionist history at all.
Yep.
Did anyone really see him being this? I think that might be a little revisionist history. Like before Jimmy Butler got to the Sixers, he had never been out of the first round of the playoffs. He wasn't this proven playoff performer that he's developed into here of late. And I think part of that is that he used to, play every minute of every game in the regular season and used to really play 100% in the regular season. And quite frankly, now he coasts a lot. And you see that at times with the Heat, who looked like junk offensively for much of the season. Right. And part of that was Butler wasn't performing at this level. I think he has realized that he needs to have himself fresh to carry the team like he has now. And he's just mastered that sort of like slow, but still get to his spots, get to the free throw line game that, I think has taken him some time to develop. So I think he's certainly a better player now, but I think a lot of people did want them to run it back and to bring back all of their stars and build on that Embiid, Simmons, Butler core. Like, I don't think that's revisionist at all. Now, I think maybe how easy that decision was, because I do think you're basically at a point, and I don't think it was expressed to the Sixers. I know it wasn't expressed to the Sixers from any party that they couldn't bring Butler back, but I think everybody had concerns that you couldn't keep Butler and Ben Simmons happy long-term. And I think that's where a lot of the talk around what to do at that time came from. A lot of people would say now, well, obviously trade Ben Simmons, keep Jimmy Butler. But when Ben Simmons was 23, coming off an all-star season, and I think just his second year in the league, I don't think that decision was as easy then as people think it is now. but it was certainly one of the major pivot points of the franchise for sure.
Do you think that the lengthy layoff will initially hurt Denver in terms of shaking off some of that layoff rust?
Yeah, I think it's always a concern for sure. It's you obviously get the benefit of rest as well, and there's balancing that concern with that benefit out. But I think basketball is very much a rhythm game. Like I would think there would be some concern over keeping them locked in. And a lot of that will come down to how, coaching staff and the players, and some teams are better at handling that than others. Mm-hmm. But I certainly think there's a concern for sure.
How do you think this plays out, this finals, Derek? I mean, you always want to kind of have the tendency to write the Heat off, but there is a rust factor here with the Nuggets. This has been a long layoff for them. How do you factor that in, and how do you see this series?
I mean, I'm going to underrate the Heat, which you just said everybody does. I'm going to do it. And I underrated the Heat at the start of the playoffs. I was pretty dismissive of them as there was talk about possibly the Sixers, basically ducking the Heat in the first round. And I thought that was ridiculous. The Heat weren't good enough to worry about that. Whoops. But I do think Denver is a better team. And I think they've been a better team throughout the course of the playoffs. I think Denver has been the most consistent team in the playoffs, which is why they are where they are. This isn't what a lot of people on this podcast are going to want to hear. I trust, Jokic more than I trust anybody else on that court. From a, just thinking the game perspective, from a preparedness perspective. I think this, again, probably not going to be popular on this show. I think he's the best player in the league and the most consistent player in the league. And I think he's going to come out there and have a good series. And I think, Denver's offense is just unstoppable right now. And I think it's the most bankable element of this series. I do think they win in 6. But, Miami has been really, for the entirety of this Jimmy Butler run, they've been incredible. They really have.
They have, no doubt.
Derek, when I look at Jokic, I don't disagree with you that he's performing as the best player in the league right now. The guy moves slow as pond water, but you can't stop him.
Yeah.
And I don't understand, with all the athleticism and the length that you have in the league, that there's nobody that can take him out of his game. Yeah. He has that little flip shot from the paint nobody can stop. He gets a rebound you don't expect him to get. He's a great passer. I don't understand, for somebody who's not overall as athletic as a lot of players we see in today's NBA game, how his game is so consistently lethal, man. It's just fascinating to watch him.
Well, he's the slowest player in the league, but he's also the quickest. He thinks the game quicker than almost anybody else. Yep. And I think when you watch him, part of the reason I think he shoots such a high percentage is I think teams are deathly afraid of double teaming him, because they know if they leave their man, if they even hesitate on a cut, he's going to find them and he's going to make them pay for a really high percentage shot. So you almost have to play him straight up than you would almost anyone else of his skill level, because he is, he's might be the best. He is the best passer in the league right now. And also he's got really good teammates around him, like Jamal Murray coming back, all the shooting they have around them. It's a really good, really well-built team that, takes a lot of his strengths and makes him impossible to guard. And there will be concerns, like defensively, they're not a great team. They never really have been. Miami's not necessarily a great offensive squad, but if their threes are going in, they'll be tough to defend. But he's incredible. Really.
All right, Derek, I tell everybody, check it out, daily6.com, the Daily 6 newsletter. Follow him on Twitter at Derek Bodner NBA. Derek, thanks, man. Always great catching up.
Appreciate you, bro.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you,
all right, man. Take care.
Derek Bodner, kind enough to hop on, and we are out of time, D-Gun. That'll do it.
Wow, that was quick.
Fast show, man.
A quick day,
Quickest 3 hours you're going to have right there. I want to thank Tone DeShields. Great job, Tone, producing the program as always. Tone, thank you, my friend. Thank you to everybody in the chat section, everybody streaming, everybody listening. We appreciate you. Remember, tomorrow we will continue with everything we always do with the Eagles, Phillies, NFL, et cetera. But we're going to have Keith Pompey join us. We'll get his thoughts on everything that's going on Sixers-wise and in the with the coaching situation with Nick Nurse, what happens with James Harden, et cetera. So he'll be joining us tomorrow. So looking forward to talking to Keith at 1:00. All right. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Get the National Football Show with Dan Cilio. Derek and I back same time tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. We will see you guys tomorrow. Appreciate it. Sports Take.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6